Hello and welcome to this episode of TGE'S Current Read. I'm your host, Sam Herbst, and today I'm talking with award-winning novelist Gurnaik Johal, whose latest work, Saraswati, has been listed among Observer's Best Debut Novels for 2025 and was a finalist for Waterstones Debut Prize for Fiction. No stranger to fiction, Gurnaik won the Somerset Maugham Award in 2022 for his short story collection, We Move. But as aforementioned, we are here to discuss his latest novel, Saraswati. Gurnaik Johal, welcome to TGE'S Current Read from across the pond.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's lovely to connect across this distance.
Gosh, yes. I mean, talking about a body of water, Saraswati, you deal with so much of that in this book. And I really can't wait to get stuck into your thought process, your writing process. But I want to share more with our readers, our listeners, and our viewers on who you are, what you're about. What more can you tell us about yourself, Gurnaik Johal?
Well, yeah, I've been writing for quite a few years now. I live in London. I was born and raised in London, studied in Manchester. And yeah, this is my first novel, but my second book. So I sort of shifted from writing short stories to something larger and longer.
Well, I mean, it's been dubbed a surging, roaring deluge of a novel, an ambitious panoramic portrait by The Guardian. It really is so ambitious. That's left readers something with like huge to chew on and consider. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this novel. Congratulations. Its acclaim is really well deserved. I'd love to know whether you're at this point writing full time or whether you have another job. Are you side hustling this? I believe you used to or still do work in children's publishing.
Yeah, so I'm still working, doing the side hustles for sure. Sadly, I'm not at the stage yet where I can write full time, but that is the dream. I'm not working in children's publishing anymore. Actually, I work as a freelancer on various things. But it was while I was writing Saraswati, I was working in kids' books. So while I was sort of working on this epic sort of 400-page literary novel, I'd be editing books about poo and dinosaurs and fairies and stuff like that.
I love it. Well, while I'm reading books about, books of literary works, such as Saraswati, I'm reading books about poo and the like to my own children. So, there's a little bit of parallel living right there.
100%.
What about your writing journey? Because you've migrated now from being let's start. How did you start? You've been writing for a few years. You are, I have to say, very young to be such a successful writer. I'm now of that age, and now I'm starting to give away my age. But now I'm going like, oh my gosh, you were born in 1998, am I right? You're young.
Yes.
And to have written a great work of literary fiction that comes to such acclaim, an Observer Best Debut Novel for the year, Waterstones, shortlisted for Waterstones Debut Award. It's a lot. And you're young. And it's huge congratulations, but there's so much more to be excited about. I just want to know what that genesis was for you. Were you writing as a kid? And you kind of carried that through, high school and into university. Did you study? Obviously, you must have studied publishing or the like at university. And were you writing the whole time?
Yeah, so funnily enough, when I was a sort of teenager, I wanted to be like a visual artist or a musician. I always wanted to do something vaguely arty, but I was pretty sure it'd be visual. And then I don't know how it works in South Africa, but we sort of have like, you got to get the right grades to get into uni when you do A-levels. So when you're sort of 18 or whatever. And I didn't get high enough grades in my art exam to get through to what I wanted to do. So I sort of pivoted and thought, I've always been pretty good at English literature, so I'll study that with creative writing. And it felt like that would be something that would keep my creative streak going. So to the application process for getting into uni was I had to write a short story and a poem. So those are the two sort of first pieces of creative writing, I suppose, I made. And then I just caught the sort of bug when I was at university, spent a lot of time reading and writing there, and sort of found that short stories were like a really great sort of entrance into fiction writing, I suppose. And yeah, I've been sort of pretty much writing every day since.
I really think that people make a mistake of thinking that short stories for writers are almost a cop-out, but there's such an
Right.
art. And not to offend you, I just
Yeah.
think that from a creative writing perspective, it's like, oh, well, it's shorter. And so it's not as,
Yeah.
grandiose as a novel and trying to fill up all those words. But there's a real art to fitting in a whole story, a whole world, doing the whole world building, character building, and fitting in a story that has impact into, 2 to 5 to, 9,000 words or whatever it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think if you spoke to a musician or something, they would say a 3-minute pop song is harder to write than a sort of 10-minute jazz piece.
Yeah.
I think there's something about concision and efficiency. So I think all sort of writers should practice in different forms. I think it helps, even if you never publish short stories, but you're only doing novels, say, practicing on the short story is I think, a key place to sort of sharpen your craft.
So what was it like moving from short stories and having this idea for Saraswati to tackle a novel of this proportion?
Yeah. Well, it was really fun. I think I knew once I'd finished my collection, so there's sort of 17 stories in there, and I probably had, I don't know, maybe 10 more, and then that were cut, and then I don't know, another 5 that I had on the go. I knew that I wanted to try my hand at a novel, but what I was very wary of was sort of taking a short story idea I had and then sort of watering it down and expanding it to fit at the kind of word count needed for a novel. So I knew I was sort of waiting for an idea that felt novel sized, and I wanted to do something quite maximalist and sort of swing the pendulum to the opposite side of what I'd been doing with my stories. So when I came across this news article that the Indian government were funding research into the idea of bringing the Saraswati River back, and that water was claimed to be returning along this route of this ancient long lost river, I sort of saw there was sort of almost a what if question of what if that river was brought back, what would that entail? And that just felt like a huge idea with lots of ramifications. And I felt, okay, there's a novel here, and this is what I'm going to work on next.
So that was the genesis. That was the seed. Is you reading this article and following that what if, following that trail, and pulling on that golden thread.
Yeah, exactly.
How else did it blossom in your mind? Because there's so much, and I must say the parallel way that you've divided the novel. Maybe let's slot this in. Is give us the elevator pitch so that we can fill our listeners into what the novel's about,
right.
And then we'll chat about how you kind of structured and divided it, because I think it's so genius.
Right, I will do my best for the elevator pitch. So it is about the Saraswati River. So in Hinduism, in the sort of ancient Rig Veda text, it's said to be this great river, the greatest of all rivers, along its banks many of the sort of hymns were composed, and there was a sort of civilization along its banks, etc. But because the river doesn't exist, for hundreds of years, people have thought it was mythological, like a kind of fictional river. But with advancements in technology, basically, we've found out that the river did in fact exist and was a major river in India, but it ran dry and ran underground after an earthquake. And based on reality, as I just explained, water is returning along this long lost ancient route. And this is because glaciers in the Himalayas are melting at such alarming rates due to climate change. And these glaciers are kind of like a water tower, you can imagine, that over 1 billion people rely upon. So the novel starts with the idea of this water is seen to be returning along the route, and the government essentially do this huge engineering project to bring the river back as a kind of act of national myth-making. But in doing so, they have to divert water away from the rivers that flow through Punjab in northern India across the border into Pakistan. So this act of national myth-making in turn becomes an act of war, and the sort of water war sort of ensues towards the end of the novel. So it's a story of this one river and this epic engineering project, but it's also a story of family. So to give a sense of how the novel is structured, it's told in 7 parts, and each part follows a different character, all of whom are distantly related to one another. And they're sort of common ancestors. We get their love story too, which is in the sort of late 1800s. And each of the descendants, through the sort of story of empire, I suppose, have ended up in different Indian diasporas around the world. So from Canada to Kenya to Singapore and so on. And each of their stories in turn interweaves with the story of this river and this project.
I love it. The Guardian kind of mentioned, I think it was The Guardian that mentioned that it was like a novel of interconnectedness, that you've tackled the genre. I like to see it as like a mosaic genre, almost like the movie Babel.
Oh yeah, right.
You know, where all the characters have their kind of lines, but they all connect in some way. I mean, you hear about the actor Amit, a few chapters before he actually comes in, and right. Arushi, the singer, the Taylor Swift-like phenome that comes in. we don't meet her directly or hear her voice or anything like that. Just one of the characters is mildly obsessed with her, but they all kind of mentioned and then mentioned again. So you really intricately weave all of this in. But I really love how you've taken myth and folktale and use that. I see it visually. So when you say that you wanted to be a visual artist, I really see the Pulkari, that Sejal, so you're dealing with a couple who in the 19th century got together and they had their 7 children, as you mentioned, and their 7 children are the tributaries, right, of the river system. And each of the children get a part of the Pulkari. And then the very beginning, is it Satnam? The very first character keeps one of the Pulkari. And you know that this is going to be kind of that golden thread that's woven throughout the novel. And you could say from your experience as a short story writer, you can see how each section can be standalone, but then you've interwoven it so beautifully. And then, like I say, I love a parallel structure. I love knowing kind of what to expect, that there's a chapter and then a piece on Sejal and Jugaad, their, mother and father ancestor or ancestors. So I really love that theme of interconnectedness, but then Sejal and Jugaad also comes with its own, it's so layered, their own like myth and folktale. Are you incredibly interested? Did you do a lot of reading, a lot of research? Did you already have all of these stories in your head that needed to get out? How much research went into the myth and folklore that you slotted into those pieces?
Yeah, I think so to sort of explain slightly, in those historical sections of the book you described, we sort of get the characters retelling these folk tales. So there's a specific form called the Punjabi Kissa, and the Kissa are sort of like tragic love stories, the sort of things you might find in like 1001 Nights. And I sort of retell the stories through the characters' voices, I suppose. And they're sort of interested in storytelling and how, history is passed down through generations, I suppose, in the forms of these stories. But in turn, their own love story in the book is kind of fictionalized by a kind of storytelling character who then sort of pretends that they were historical figures from years gone by. And the story of their love, of their they sort of fall in love across a kind of caste divide, becomes its own kind of fiction. So throughout the book, there's often bits where I fictionalize real history, or I sort of create fake history out of fiction I've come up with. And there's always this sort of movement, this sort of uneasy blurring, I think, between reality and fiction. And I think that's something I wanted to explore also in the sort of political elements of the book. We live in the age of fake news, right? So I wanted to have fun with that, I suppose. And yeah, it was really fun in the research to incorporate these real folk tales. And also my sort of one obsession throughout writing the novel was origin myths. And I was sort of constantly reading origin myths from different cultures around the world. and finding sort of similarities and these sort of almost like rhymes that happen, whether it's, in the northeast Canada or in South Africa. There are sort of elements of connection, I suppose, through the stories we tell ourselves and the way we define ourselves through fiction.
So was it sort of as a way of looking at the kissa and at the different ways of storytelling, the origin myths? Did you happen upon the genre of historical fiction in that way? Because it was just like, well, that's the best way to kind of play with telling the story, right?
Yeah, I think, well, I knew the sort of most of the novel would be set in the present day, sort of going slightly forward into imagined future. So it's slightly speculative towards the end as we move through the novel. And I'm a big believer in sort of counterweights in fiction. So I knew that if I was going forward, I also felt like I needed to go back to give the book balance. And then in turn, it ended up with more, I suppose, historical elements than I started off with. But for me, I think with a country that's sort of looking for an origin story, and these characters who are often thinking about where they're coming from, and they're from different diasporas and have different, I suppose, levels of access to their own family origin story, right? Some of them have been told since they were kids about, your great grandfather came from there and ended up here and all this kind of stuff. And others are sort of grown up isolated from their original stories. So it felt right to be able to give the reader that access and take the reader back in a way that I think the characters wish they could do, but obviously can't. So yeah, I think it was fun to explore, and also something that's, I think, come about since I've finished the book and been thinking about it for conversations like these, is realizing that elements of those historical sections feel almost as if they're prophecies of like what will happen after the book ends, in terms of, these are characters living through a moment of famine and drought in India. So yeah, I think it's been, I feel like I've not quite put my finger on how it came about because it happened organically, but there's definitely different threads to pull out.
And there's definitely something about speculative fiction. And for whatever reason, I think when you deal with climate activism or you're dealing with that at the moment, I find that it is, foreshadowing almost. Like you're trying to think. I find that a lot of artists, so you see it in science fiction all the time. You can go back, decades or even, a century from now and see that speculative writers have been on point with kind of what's scarily on point. Do you feel that that's like what's happened with you? Because the Indus Water Treaty is happening, like there's so much politics happening, and I'm really not on top of it. But now that I've read your novel, my interest is piqued, and that's the beauty of fiction, is that I'm going, okay, well, now this is interesting to me. So now I will go and read the news on it, and it'll have something personal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I started with that question of what would happen if the river was brought back. And I wanted to take it to its sort of logical conclusion in that idea of it might divert water away from the border, because I'd been really interested in this concept of water wars, and it is something in like future forecasting was like a really big scary thing that we're sort of on the precipice now of fighting not just for resources like oil and stuff like that, but for water, right? The thing we all rely upon to live. And you can see this around the world where there's a country that's upstream from another, that they sort of hold a kind of power over the country that's downstream, right? So in Ethiopia and Egypt, or in the Fertile Crescent, even places like Malaysia and Singapore, there are these really fraught, I suppose, fraught situations across the borders. And one thing that had been sort of this, I suppose, held up as this like ideal of international diplomacy was the Indus Waters Treaty. So when partition happened and India and Pakistan were sort of created and that border was created, there had to be a sort of water sharing agreement because all the rivers in Punjab flow into the Indus in Pakistan, and the Indus is the kind of lifeblood of Pakistan in terms of its agriculture and industry and stuff. So this agreement had survived decades of conflicts, and I sort of thought, okay, the darkest thing I could imagine is if that was broken, because if India could suddenly control a kind of tap on what water Pakistan receives through the Indus, that would be really, really terrifying. So I saw this idea of the sort of Saraswati as a kind of almost excuse for breaking that agreement. And what was terrifying was a month before publication, there was that conflict that arose across the border, and the Indus water treatment was treaty was put into abeyance. So this sort of India now claims to reserve the right to sort of do with the flow of those rivers what it wants to. But the problem is it sort of has nowhere to store it. So one idea that's sort of floated is to divert the water into the channel of the Saraswati River. So when I talk about reality and fiction blending, I didn't want what I'd fictionally written to turn into reality.
It's so spooky. I mean, I like, what are you going to write next, and what's going to happen in the world? Now I need to know that. What is Gurnaik going to prophesy now?
I'll write a utopian sort of story about people getting along and conflicts ending.
Man, make it beautiful. Nice. Yes, make it beautiful. I'd love to know more about, like, I love diaspora fiction. But you're of Indian descent, but you're living in London. So there's a lot of rich history there. It's something that you as a writer would be able to contribute that I wouldn't as a writer. You know, so what is your personal kind of affinity towards that, this kind of content? And Punjab, obviously, because of the geographical location, right? That is why, the seven siblings, and Sejal and Jagad, they came from there. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm of Punjabi descent, and sort of family over different generations moved to the UK. But I always found, I suppose, the vantage point of being so I'm a second generation immigrant. It's interesting because you kind of have access to multiple cultures at once, and I kind of believe in the novelist almost as a kind of anthropologist, and you often think of anthropologist as someone who's able to look into a society and sort of partake in it, but while still being at a remove from it, I suppose. And for me, that means I can sort of look into and access and be a part of British society, but also at a remove, slightly access this sort of Punjabi culture as well. And each of these characters, I knew I wanted to write about India, but knew I couldn't do it from a sort of place of belonging in that way. So it was a sort of useful vantage point, I suppose, to enter the country through the eyes of all these people that have come from different diasporas. I felt like I could connect to it personally through them, I suppose, even though each of them is very different.
Yeah, I was interested in why you started with Satnam. But I think it makes sense because that was kind of your personal starting point. I'm really making an assumption here. Do you think that because your characters, you've got a blend of male and female characters, vastly different from different parts of the world. But Satnam's a London native, and comes back to after his BB passes away and stays. And that's where the novel begins. Did you find yourself in Satnam in that way?
No, so funnily enough, in my first book, this collection of stories, there's like this huge cast of characters, and all of them are like different ages, genders, sexualities, and stuff. So I knew that was always what I was interested in, was imagining people different to myself. So almost as a joke, I gave the first character in this book sort of vaguely similar demographics to me. But in terms of personality, I think we're like polar opposites. He's probably the one I have least in common
Really?
with. If you think about the way he acts or thinks, and it was quite fun to write someone at a remove in that way. Whereas I think we have closer access to some of the other characters in the book who are, 50 years older than me or of a different gender. And it's interesting as well, because I always saw throughout the writing process that I had seven main characters on equal footing. But readers, I think, because you come to Satnam first, sort of associate him as a kind of main character, I suppose. And yeah. In a way, I could have started the novel with one of the other characters if it worked out that way chronologically.
True. And I don't want to give too much away, but you change hands in terms of your voice or
Yes.
your perspective, and so interesting in the way that you do that. I don't. How much can we say? I don't know if you wanna chat about that.
Say,
So
yeah. So there's.
Go
I
ahead,
was just
yeah.
going to explain for listeners. So the novel is largely told in the third person, but this we find out is filtered through a kind of first person narrator who is one of the seven descendants, and she is sort of trying to bring each of the different characters together for a reason I won't explain. But yeah, so we get a switch in perspective from third to first, which is fun.
Why female, firstly, and why is she more anonymous than the other characters?
Good question. Female, probably just, I think that just came naturally. But then sort of analyzing it after the fact, potentially because so much of the novel centers around, ideas around family and motherhood, and sort of this idea of a family lineage, in a sense, being a kind of link between mothers, I suppose. And I think I knew the sort of when I talk about, I spoke earlier about what liking balance in fiction. Like I knew the story started with with the death of Satnam's grandmother, so I had the idea of it ending with a kind of birth. So but yeah, I don't think I've thought too much about it. And why is she? We have less access to her day-to-day life, I suppose, because maybe in the similar way that I don't like writing myself into the novel and I'm more interested in other people, I think she has that same sort of personality where she's interested in all these other characters but doesn't want to give away much about herself. So yeah.
And also speaking about her husband, your father, she addresses, it's written in the second person to her child, ultimately, eventually.
Yeah.
It's really interesting what you've done, and I think it keeps the reader kind of entrenched in the story, where you're so used to reading in the third person, and then suddenly you realize you're not, because there's an I introduced, and then it becomes first person, but then it becomes second person, and you're mentioning the father. And I read into it, if you'll allow me. As we do as readers, I just kind of think this theory of, or not theory, this concept of human connectedness and how generations carry on from one another. There will be, I don't know what my great-great-great-grandchildren are going to look or be or sound like or look like, and it was almost like this little bit of remove as the birth, as you mentioned, there's a death, we start knowing the ancestors intricately, and we start really getting a feel for these characters. And then there's a little bit of anonymity. You have insight into the way that the narrator's thinking, especially towards the end, but you don't know the husband's name. Your father, she keeps saying your father, and there is like an anonymity. And your mother, your father. And it's almost like you're so beautifully handing over the baton to the next generation. And so it goes.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like to me as a reader.
It's a lovely reading of it. I think it's interesting you say anonymity about, describing someone as your father or whatever. I think there's also kind of intimacy, right? Because it assumes the reader it puts the reader in a really close relationship, I suppose. But no, I always think when we think of twists, it's always a sort of plot twist, which I love, and there's hopefully quite a few in the novel. But I'm always interested as well in formal twists, where the novel, the way it's working, it feels like it switches or changes gear. And so yeah, the switch in perspective that it occurs with that sort of felt like I could have fun with it.
Yeah, and it comes across. I think I think you do it really successfully. I haven't come across a lot of novels that do that. Is there any kind of reading that were inspired by other authors that have done similar things?
One book that's come up in regards to this question is The Topeka School by Ben Lerner. Came out a few years ago. Because in that story, and that's quite a sort of autobiographical, autofiction novel, so working in an opposite sort of way to mine, but we get the novelist character writing about his childhood and writing about his parents. But funny enough, the sort of sections about his childhood, about him, are in the third person, and then the chapters that are from about his parents are in the first person. So he sort of ventriloquizes the parents in the novel, and I thought that was really fun and playful, but also brought up, I guess, yeah, interesting ideas around, how we access interiority and stuff like that.
I love the way that you experiment with fiction and how you're drawing the inspiration, but it's not like a copycat thing at whatsoever. Your work is so original, right. And I do think that that's the artist in you. But very clearly you are, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a Gen Z, younger generation dealing with a world in turmoil, and your Saraswati deals with so much. You cover political reflections, Indian nationalism, environmental activism, and terrorism, human connection, as I mentioned. But then you even touch on the toxic masculinity element and social media, internet culture, and from a personal perspective, really loved the way that you tackled motherhood. So, as we've said, this is such an expansive and ambitious novel. There's a lot that you've touched on, and it's reflective of human life, but it's not simple. It's anything but simple. I do want to ask, though, if there's like one single bottom line, like a central message that you wanted to bring across. If anybody had to kind of sum it up in that one central message, what would it be?
That's a good, difficult question. Is my sort of cop-out answer is, I think fiction's job is not to answer questions, but maybe complicate the questions. So I didn't sit down with a kind of message I wanted to convey, but I think the novel form, and especially in reading it, but especially in writing it, is kind of a way of figuring out stuff almost subconsciously. But in looking back at the book, I think if there was one message maybe in it I could draw out, maybe it's the danger of simple stories, of simple narratives, of condensing complicated histories into slogans or mottos, or I think maybe that's what I'll say.
Oh, absolutely. You do so well to kind of give different sides of the same story, especially in the the political. Well, even in is it Hasimran and Amit? There's tension between these two very similar men when the readers get to the story. I'm not going to reveal too much. But yeah, there you have kind of insight into the way one thinks and the way the other thinks. And you have a very delicate way of bringing characters across that you can actually empathize with either party. So it's that balance that you look for in your writing, right?
Absolutely. And it's a bit of a cliche now, but I think we can think of novels as a kind of empathy machines, right? As a kind of technology for exercising empathy, because what they do is make the reader, enter the mind of another person and sort of sees what's shared and what's different in that jumping. And for me, the power of that a novel has that other forms of art don't, is that you can do that more than once within the art piece, right? So you can enter 7 different sort of minds in this book, Whereas in a film, I think you sort of always sort of exterior to the person. Even if we follow one character quite closely all the way through, we're sort of always looking at them rather than through their eyes.
Right. I think it's a cliche among the writing world. You mentioned the word cliche, but I don't think it is in the kind of extremist thinking that the world has currently. You know, especially if you look at internet culture and social media and the way, culture wars are happening. I do think that there is kind of a black and a white, and you very cleverly operate within the grey while, delving into that empathy. So I love these characters. I've grown to love them. We mentioned the narrator, which she only comes in later. Satnam, there's Parla and his Bibi and Harp, and then there's Parla's sister. I forget her name. It started with an R.
Rehan.
Yeah, Rehan. Katrina and Jay. I think Katrina's story is my favorite. I hesitate to say that, but you gutted me, man. I'll leave it at that. Natu, Akayu and Radha. There's a huge cast of characters. Gyan, her story was also great though. You've done really well. Harsimran and Amit and Jasleen. Jasleen she's doing the Lord's work, man. She's stuck through a lot. That character. Musafir, he also really touched me, his story. I don't know. It's hard to choose a favorite. I really enjoyed all of them. I really enjoyed all of their sections. Katrina, I think. Katrina will stick with me just because of how you broke my heart.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I'll take my apology in chocolate. Thank you. Or a tour of London when I come visit. Jokes aside, I think Katrina emotionally hit me at the right spot. Books enter your life at a particular time, and I think that Katrina story was the one that I'll really take home with me. But that's not to say that the others were any less in any way. Do you have a favorite? Is it like choosing between your children?
I assume it feels like that. Yeah, do I have a favorite? I think, funnily enough, my favorites are kind of the minor characters that we don't get enough of, because they're the ones that stick in my mind, because my sort of fiction making brain is like wondering what their lives are like, I suppose. Whereas I've done so much work on the main characters that I sort of almost I know them too well and a bit fed up with them.
So who are you wondering about?
Wondering about some of the sort of dodgy politicians, maybe, or some of the neighbors and stuff like this. But in terms of the main characters, I think, Katrina was a lot of fun to write. And I think, it's something that came about sort of unconsciously, but I realized was a kind of rule for the book, was each chapter would have a vaguely different genre. So, there's a kind of crime story at the start. There's maybe a rom-com with Katrina. There's a thriller with Gyan, a western with Musafir. So there are these different genre tinges on each one, I suppose. And I much prefer the rom-com in terms of what I would watch or read. So I think Katrina might stick out for that reason too.
Gosh, I never thought about it as a rom-com, but you're absolutely right. They all, you know what side character I'm thinking of? You're gonna laugh at this. The donkey that wakes Musafir up and saves his life.
That would be a great story, just following the donkey.
Just following the donkey and the old man and is it his son? I assumed that they were an old man and his son. And their whole story.
Yeah.
We're giving away too much, Gurnaik, I think.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful cast of characters. It's really evident that you have lived in their world for so long. I really look forward to what you have to write and say next, because you've got a hella long writing journey ahead of you.
Fingers crossed.
No, definitely you do, and that's what every review that I've read has said. Is just like, this is just the start, guys. This is just the start. Let's see what's next, and that's no pressure on you as a writer. But I'm wondering, writers, I think, get used to constructive criticism, right? Is there anything that you have taken? Do you read reviews? Do you, are you invested in it? And how do you take it up? And is there anything that you've thought, because it's obvious that you like to be challenged. There's no writer who doesn't like to be challenged that would tackle a book of this, a maximalist novel, as you called it. So what from the reviews and the feedback would you say has been the constructive criticism that you're going to take forward into your writing from now?
That is a great question. Because some of the negative elements of reviews are often describing stuff that's not in the book that they wished was, in which case it's like, you can only fit so much in. I think in terms of maybe constructive stuff is potentially thinking I should narrow the focus of the story to be able to tell it, to go for depth rather than breadth. And I very consciously in this book wanted to go for breadth and to go for a kind of a global aspiration, I suppose. And I think elements of reviews is sort of potentially saying, if you work on a smaller plot, you might get more done. I don't know whether I'll in terms of it's definitely constructive feedback. I just don't know whether it makes me want to agree or to kind of double down on my on my sort of impulse and go even further next time. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, or maybe a mix of both, that you take that on, because I can see what makes sense to me is that you're working on this book as a work of diasporic historical fiction, and it's really indicative of the Indian diaspora. It's a group of people that come from a particular place that are spread out across geographies, and that's exactly what you've done. And so I think the sprawling nature of the novel, and as you mentioned, the breadth, does exactly that. And if we're looking at writing as a craft, as an art, sure, you can criticize it and you can say I would have preferred a sort of more depth than breadth, but I get where you were coming from. Let me put it that way.
Great. Awesome.
But yeah, also do understand the depth of things. That said, there's still layers within it. So I think you go as deep. And on that note, I'd love for you to read a section from the last part of the novel, which I've chosen with intention not to give away too much to our readers. But there's obviously an overarching kind of theme of water and the movement of water. It makes me think of, now I've put myself on the spot. Was it a Toni Morrison quote about water?
Oh, yeah. All water has perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was.
Yes.
That one?
Across the pond, our brains meet. That's exactly it. There's so much richness to the theme of water, and you've taken it to... you've likened it to human movement in a crowd swell that happens, which is quite a thrilling, tense moment in the book. And I don't think we need to give too much context other than to maybe explain to our readers who Indra is, because this is a key moment where this project is being launched, I suppose, to the public, right? So it's a real project that's happening, but you fictionalized it, and it's a moment of when Saraswati, the engineering feat, is being revealed to the public, and there is a groundswell, and someone called Indra is talking. And if you could give us some context around that, and then kick us off on the reading.
Yeah, so this is a sort of celebration of the river being completed and being brought back. And as part of that, Indra, who's the prime minister who's spearheaded this project, so a fictional prime minister character, is part of a kind of procession along the length of the river. And we meet him here, seen by the narrator, at the sort of celebrations along near to the river's mouth. So this is in a city that's been built, a new city built upon the river's banks. And it's called New Lothal, which is a kind of play on this ancient city, which was thought to be one of the first port cities in the world in the same location. And yeah, so I had this sort of crowd crush scene in my brain when I was thinking about all these people pressed together for this moment. And one interesting fact I found was that um, at the point where there's 7 people per square meter, that's a kind of threshold in a crowd where people behave not as individuals but as a liquid. So it felt like a very fitting place to take the sort of intense ending of the book. So yeah, so here we see a sort of people not acting as individuals but as one. Perhaps the terror, in retrospect, was the fact that there was no actual attack, that it was simply the crowd, its sheer size and density that caused all the chaos and damage. People were trying to climb up the floodlights, they were crawling up the fencing. The voices that I could hear were begging for an end, but we could not stop. It was not me pushing into them, but all the people pushing into me. I could not control what was already happening, what my body was being forced to do. It was and was not my fault that, at a certain point, the fencing before us broke and several people fell into the water, and the people behind them too, for the pressure of the crowd persisted, and people had to push back and fight. They had to kick and punch, and for some of the pressure to seize, and punch for some of the pressure to seize, and some attempted to pull others out of the water, but not everyone could be reached, not everyone saved. More fireworks were going off, or was that gunfire? And Indra was as close to us now as he would be, waving and smiling as his boat progressed from our right to our left, west towards the river's mouth and the sea. The crowd swelled again to get closer to him, and more shots were fired, and another flare, compounding the panic. Quickly the tide turned and the current flowed back away from the river towards the narrow exits. I didn't have the time or the space to turn to face the direction of travel, and as I was pulled with the people, I looked out at the river, at Indra disappearing beyond the reach of the floodlights and back into the darkness.
Yeah, it's the way the movement of the crowd was. This was a part I must admit that I was listening to. I toggled between. I love to toggle between kind of the audio and the
Oh, great.
and the physical copy. And I was doing house chores, and I actually had to stand still and listen and wait. And I just thought that exact, because you mention it in the book, how 7 people per square meter, that's when people start to act as a liquid and they're kind of not moving out of their own volition. I just thought that is so interesting. And I mean, the whole novel was peppered with, nuggets like that I just found so fascinating. And, when you speak about New Lothal, it was something like I Googled Lothal and I went down this. You go down so many rabbit holes of lore and myth and folktale, and then also facts like that you bring in, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I really would recommend this novel, especially for lovers of historical fiction, Indian diaspora, and just anybody who's looking to really be challenged. I think the breadth, it's not inaccessible. Let me just clarify that as well. It's not one of those like, ooh, okay, I really have to sit and concentrate. It has such a great entertainment factor. I mean, there's a car chase, for heaven's sake. So
Yeah.
let's be real.
And
here.
jokes.
And jokes, yes. It's good. It's so good. I loved this read. I'd love to know, firstly, what you're reading now. Every writer is a reader. I'd love to know what is inspiring you, what's keeping you entertained, or what you're watching as well. Because I find that writing and television as well is it piques as many writers' interests as what novels do, or nonfiction, of course. And then whether you're working on anything new, I know that that's a swear word for a lot of writers, especially ones with a full-time job. So, let's get started with the first question. What is it that you're reading or are inspired by at the moment?
Well, I've got the sort of great honor of doing an event tomorrow with Madeleine Dien. And I have her book right here, The Book of Records, which I've sort of just started. And that's a really, well, so far very ambitious novel, which I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into. What television am I watching? I'd be lying if I could say it was anything sort of prestige.
No,
I watch a lot
I
of
want to know what's the
yeah,
tea.
I watch a lot of reality TV. So
Like what?
stuff like, oh God, real trash, like 90 Day Fiance, Made in Chelsea, Love is Blind, all that kind of stuff. I love it.
And funnily enough,
I
it
think,
comes through in the book as well,
yeah, exactly.
right?
So I can claim it as a kind of research, maybe.
I'll give it to you. I'll
Um,
give it to you if you give me my chocolate for breaking my heart. Is that a deal?
yeah, I'll make sure we can send that over.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. So reality. Also, you need to switch your brain off. I think
Yeah.
from time to time. So I'm fully behind that as well. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so you've said what's on your bedside table. What is on your writing desk, if anything?
Oh, well, I write at the library, so
Okay.
nothing will be on the desk, which is quite nice because my desk at home has just become a kind of place for clutter and random stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I don't really have any kind of. I know some writers have a kind of Zen place, or quite ritualistic with how they write. They might light candles and stuff like that. But for me, it's just wherever I can fit it in, whether that's typing on my phone on the tube or going to the library. Um, and I think your other question was about what am I working on now?
Mm-hmm. Is it a
Um,
swear word for you? Is
it's
it
no sweat.
okay?
No, it's fine. I I'm slowly starting a new novel, which will be a kind of historical adventure story. I think about a kind of at the moment it's about a first contact with a previously uncontacted tribe.
Ah,
Yeah, so it's
interesting.
kind of colonial story. Yeah.
Is it taking you down a rabbit hole of fiction like I'm assuming Saraswati did?
Yeah, but I'm trying to be studious and academic at the moment and start with the nonfiction first. So
Okay.
I'm reading a lot about anthropology and ethnography and sort of historical, trying to read historical accounts of people of these kind of adventurers in their own voices, I suppose, before reading the fiction about them, which I'm sure I'll enjoy more.
Gotcha. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
interesting, and I think those nuggets, like the 7 people per square foot,
Mm.
is that right? Per square foot?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Square meter,
square
maybe, or
meters.
yeah.
Sorry. We work in meters in South Africa as well, so I'm not sure why I slipped up on that. But yeah, that's where you're gonna get that good content. That and reality television, right?
Yeah, it's the mix of high and low, I think, is very important.
Well, I think that comes across really well in your novel. I think people will be challenged, but then there's a great element of entertainment. And I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading you and getting into your mind with this book. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for coming on to TGE's current read, Gurnaik Johal. This is it really is an immense novel and a great feat, and I look forward to anything you write next.
Thanks so much. This has been, yeah, so lovely to chat with you, and thanks for having me on the show.